In this video we are looking at the evolution of Formula 1 cars. The top level of motorsport is Formula 1, F1. It's one of the rare sports that transcends its niche audience and attracts a global following since it's the fastest and most technologically advanced racing series on the planet. It's true that Formula 1 has been around for nearly 70 years. Although many innovative motorsports have come and gone, Formula 1 has endured. Established in 1950, it is one of the world's oldest racing series and the most popular and lucrative type of car racing. Even more pivotal to the development of Formula 1 were the other races conducted in the 1930s. After World War II, the series moved to specially built racetracks, whereas in the 1930s racing was still done on public highways. Spectators needed to be shielded from the car's high speeds, and the show needed to improve without endangering the drivers. The birth of F1, 1950–1959. In 1950, Silverstone, England played host to the inaugural Formula 1 race, which also took place on London's public streets. That same year, the British Grand Prix hosted the inaugural Formula 1 World Championship race, which has continued annually since then. There was Grand Prix racing, the pinnacle of international competition, which took place on road courses until the 1930s. And there was Formula Libre racing, an open-wheeled form of competition that took place on a variety of surfaces. Even though there were also Formula 1 and Formula 2 races, Formula Libre competitions were the main attraction. During F1's formative years, British teams like BRM, Connaught, and Nigel Norman Racing dominated the sport. Many of the drivers were also of British descent. Formula 1 vehicles from this era also stood out in comparison to those of today. The cars of the era were also open-wheeled, but the engines were in front of the driver. 1960–1969, big changes. Formula 1 changed dramatically from its first decade into the second, and the 1960s were the conclusion of an era in motorsports. A rise in racing deaths and a change in emphasis away from Europe both highlighted this decade. In the 60s, there was an alarming increase in Formula 1 fatalities. In the first decade of the series, only 2 drivers were killed. However, more than 30 drivers lost their life in the 1960s. Because of the increasing number of deaths, the show's focus and priorities shifted significantly in 1968. Johan Rindt was given the Formula 1 Drivers' Championship after his death in 1970. He was the first and only driver to receive this honor in this manner. A new era in Formula 1 began in the same year, with the addition of the Constructors' Championship to the Drivers' Championship, which had been awarded annually since 1950. 1970–1979, a decade of change. As the 1970s progressed, Formula 1 began to expand beyond its European roots and become a truly international sport. Even while Britain continued to be the sport's epicenter and the site of most events, several other countries started participating in the series during this decade. Formula 1 cars with turbochargers were also introduced during this decade, ushering in a trend toward cleaner, more fuel-efficient engines that has persisted to the present day. There was a shift in Formula 1's focus from the drivers and teams to the fans in the 2000s. This includes the use of on-board camera systems for broadcasting races and the advent of computerized timing and scoring systems. 1980–1989, further innovations. Formula 1 entered its first really contemporary era in the 1980s. Formula 1 vehicles have become more aerodynamic and powerful thanks to the advent of carbon fiber chassis this decade. There was an increase in the usage of sophisticated digital data systems and the development of electronic traction and launch control systems. The 1980s also marked the start of Formula 1's global expansion, which would continue throughout the 1990s and the 2000s. In the 1980s, every continent with a significant human population hosted a Formula 1 event, thanks to the advent of the Brazilian and Japanese Grand Prix as well as the return of the United States Grand Prix, which had not taken place there since 1960. The 1980s saw a major shift in Formula 1 as the sport became increasingly commercialized. While the majority of Grand Prix racing was still privately supported in the mid-1980s, a global economic downturn necessitated that teams explore alternative funding mechanisms. 1990–1999, enter the new millennium. The 1990s were the beginning of the show's global presence, marking the end of its existence as a predominantly European-centric series. Another notable trend of the 1990s was the increase of corporate sponsorship in place of individual donors. In the 1990s, Bernie Ecclestone was instrumental in F1's expansion around the world, by facilitating the creation of new races in various parts of the world. Some entirely new circuits, like the Brazilian Autódromo de Interlagos, the Japanese Suzuka circuit, and the Canadian circuit Gilles Villeneuve, were also inaugurated during this decade. Many advancements in technology and safeguards were also introduced during this time period. Semi-automatic transmissions, first utilized by the Ferrari team, electronic traction control, and grooved tires are just a few of the major innovations introduced to the championship this decade. 2000 onwards, the current state of the art. Formula One had through an even more dramatic shift in the 2000s than the 1990s. In this decade, the series introduced new types of cars, expanded the types of teams that may participate, and modified its presentation style. For instance, at FanDuel Sportsbook, customers can wager on their preferred sporting event. The series made an effort to slow down and make things safer in the 2000s. The year 2009 marked the debut of Kinetic Energy Recovery Systems, or KERS, marking the beginning of the hybrid era in Formula One. The current Formula One logo debuted during this decade. It was the first redesign of the series branding since the 1980s. Lewis Hamilton, the 2008 World Drivers' Champion, drives the Mercedes F1 W05 Hybrid to victory. For the Bahrain, China, Malaysia, and Spain Grands Prix, the F1 icon drove a Mercedes F1 W05 Hybrid and won each race. Mercedes's F1 W05, the first car to use a hybrid powertrain, used a PU106A 1.6-litre V6 turbocharged hybrid engine. Only Mercedes, Ferrari, and Renault had hybrid engines that were up to the 2014 FIA standards. For the 2015 season, the output of the new engine was increased to 870 horsepower. Overwheel winglets and wheel covers, previously used in F1 in 2009, were standard equipment for all cars in the 2022 season. Tire protectors. In the past, F1 cars' performance suffered because the spinning wheels disturbed the air around them. As a result of this phenomena, F1 car performance dropped by as much as 46%. To address this issue, manufacturers have begun offering 18-inch tires with wheel winglets. In the world of auto racing, the old is often made new again. The Formula One World Championship is a prime example. For decades, fans around the world have witnessed this renowned motorsport go through a seemingly endless cycle of change and growth, with nearly every new season introducing its own set of subtle but significant regulation updates. Despite this, the Formula One Grand Prix continues to be one of the world's most difficult, fast-paced, and spectacular sporting events, so it's instructive to trace its history. Formula One has seen many transformations since its inception, and its potential future developments are intriguing to contemplate. This was the evolution of the Formula One cars. We hope you liked the video. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon for more videos about the evolution of things. Thank you for watching.